I'm an early riser, so I got up. As I came down the stairs, I knew immediately that there was something wrong. Dana began giving CPR. I went and got my phone and called 911. It felt like it took forever. And we went to the hospital. And when we got there, we walked into the door. They put us in a waiting room. Very quickly just said, we did what we could, but he's dead. It just felt like super final and super just fast.
This is the Lost Child Podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast. Pam, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. Just to jump right in, can you give us your son's name who passed away?
Yeah, so our son Ryan passed away in 2014. He died by suicide. He was the youngest of our 4 children. We have Kristen, then Alex and Sarah, and Ryan was the caboose, as my parents would have put it. We miss him terribly every day and still do.
Yeah. What was Ryan like?
Oh, he was delightful. He was my baby. So he was my pal in a lot of ways. He was the one that I had that time with when everyone else was in school. I had time with him. So I felt like we got to pal around a lot. He was really bright. Not necessarily a great student, but smart and capable. He wasn't a perfect kid, but he was really good, had a really good heart, liked to help other people. I think he saw maybe other individuals. I think he often felt on the outside of things. He wasn't necessarily he was really funny, really, really sarcastic, but wasn't necessarily a class clown. So not necessarily the kid that was in the middle of, the party or the attention or whatever. I think sometimes he felt a little bit outside of things. And I think he noticed that in others and had a soft heart for that. I mentioned that he was sarcastic. He could charm me out of just about anything. So, and he knew that and used it. And partly because he was the youngest, he got away with it a lot. And that's okay. I'm fine with that. But no, he was and is, I believe, just a really good person. He's the kind of kid, I could ask him to do something and I didn't have to say, get up and do it now. I could say, hey, and usually he was reading a book, right? Always had his nose in a book. And I could say, finish the page or finish the chapter, but I need you to take the garbage out or I need you to unload the dishwasher. And I could say it to him and not have to hound him. He would do it and it wouldn't be immediate, but he would do it. He would do what he was asked. He was, I would say that he was obedient in many ways. And like I said, not always quick on it, but I knew I could count on him. Yeah. I think that's something very special to say about someone. I always knew that I could count on him.
Yeah, that is special.
It is.
Do you have a favorite memory or maybe like a picture or video in your mind, that you kind of go back to? Yeah,
I think, the one that I, it's very tender for me and it encapsulates how he treated me and kind of how I looked at him. I had to have a spine surgery several years ago and he would have been like 8 or 9 years old at the time. So in school, mostly independent, but still needed me. Anyway, so after my surgery, I couldn't bend, I couldn't lift, I couldn't twist. I had some limited mobility. And there was a moment in time when he and I were the only two alone and I needed help getting my shoes on. And I remember asking him to help me with my shoes. And he kind of gave me a funny look like, what? Like, can't put your shoes on. And I'm like, I can't bend down far enough to put my shoes on. I need your help. Yeah. And so he did. And then when he was done, he patted my leg, kind of like you would do to a toddler. And what was cute about it is I kind of had a recollection of my parents doing that to me. And it was like, I probably did that to him. Just, there you go, right? Here's your shoes are ready. But to have a child doing that to the parent, that role reversal of him taking care of me, but doing it with a little tenderness, right? That little extra, off we go, Mom. So I remember that very vividly. His age, his kindness toward me. So the other memories, are a little more fuzzy, but just the times he made me laugh. Like I said, he could charm me with, he knew if he got me to laugh, then he was going to get out of something.
Whatever.
So he probably used that more than he should have, but that's okay. It was okay. So.
Super good. Can you tell us a little bit about how Ryan died? And because it deals with suicide, can you give us any of the context that we need to, if you found out or knew anything from like a mental health standpoint to begin with, and how he approached you or anything like that? Just give us full context about his death from your perspective.
Okay. So I think about 4 years prior to his passing, we recognized that he was struggling with anxiety and depression. In fact, he had an attempt at that time. So when he was a freshman in high school was the first time that we knew that he had some suicidal ideation or thoughts of suicide. And at that particular time, we went to his doctor and he prescribed an antidepressant. So he was on medication. We also did counseling for a time.
Did he come to you, or did you approach him or find out through like a different route, or how did that play out to where you actually came to like, oh, you're struggling with this?
I can't remember honestly what the exact incident was, but I know that it was a moment in time, and he used the words, I want to take my life. I think that was how he phrased it. And so it was like, oh, wake up call. And so we did what we could to help in the moment. And like I said, that, I pretty much immediately called the pediatrician and, was able to get him in pretty quickly. Yeah. And then started counseling. Counseling took a little more time. And in general, it is, a long game solution. We had honestly mixed experiences with counseling at that time. The first practitioner that we saw was great, and Ryan developed a rapport really quickly, but suicidal ideation was not their that's not their niche, and felt like he needed to see someone that specialized in working with teens and working with kids that had depression. And so we were very diligent about that. We tried a couple of different counselors, and so that probably went on for several months, but not more than months. And by the end of that, it was exhausting on every level. It was exhausting emotionally, financially, to be honest. At that particular time, our insurance didn't cover any kind of mental health treatment. So it was all out of pocket. It was hard.
And you would say it was hard for him too? Was it exhaustive for him too?
Yeah, it was. At the same time, we did see improvements.
Yeah.
Between the medication and doing therapy, things were turning around. He was no longer having thoughts of suicide at that particular time. So we said, let's just take a break. And we felt like things were doing better. We always were careful and watchful around him, always after that. But we missed signs when it returned. So fast forward, the beginning of his senior year.
Was he still taking medication at this time, or he had stopped?
No, he had stopped.
Okay.
He took it for almost 2 years, I think it is. I can't remember. But again, we saw improvements, and he kind of wanted to go off, and he kind of weaned himself off of it.
Okay, he wanted to get off. Okay.
I didn't worry about it at the time. He was active in band. He had a group of friends. Things appeared to be more stable for him emotionally. Looking back, maybe not so much, but it's hard to know that. So when he started his senior year, I began to notice he was not as plugged in. Maybe he was in the band, loved band. Had been a great experience all the way through high school. Was a section leader, and he had missed a couple of practices, which was really unusual for him because that was his thing. And in many ways, especially for high school kids, they kind of get an identity, right? They become, this is the group that they're a part of. And for him, that was band, which was very positive. A great band, great program. It was wonderful on so many levels. So I noticed that, he'd missed a couple of practices, and I was worried about it. And I thought senioritis, right? He's just, senior year, he's just, getting ready to graduate, all those things. And so looking back, 2020 hindsight, I think that was an indication of him losing interest in something that he had previously been passionate about, which is an indication of depression. At the time, I didn't see it as a symptom. I think it was, now that I look back. He was having trouble sleeping. So he would stay up, really late. So even, we're still at the beginning of the school year. So I thought he was adjusting to schedules, but sleep disturbance is another symptom of depression. Again, things that I look back on and wish I had understood it for what it was in the moment.
Yeah.
So I can't
at the time,
go back.
You were doing the best that you could.
Absolutely. Right? Doing the best that we could. And I just didn't see it as a mental health.
Well, it's hard
symptom.
because he was a senior in high school, and those things seniors do. A lot of them like to stay up late, and or they just don't have interest in certain things anymore. Right. So it's kind of hard.
And life changes, and that's okay too. So I guess I just didn't pick up on it. And after he died, I did. Right. Then you go back and start to dissect every little conversation, everything that happened, and go, oh, I should have known this. I should have. And that's maybe not constructive. I have to stop myself when I do that should haves, because as you said, I was doing the best that I could. We were all doing the best that we could at the time. So that was kind of that, beginning of the senior year. It was September. It was almost the end of September, but still feeling like it was the beginning of the year. We had, so kind of back up a little bit, the day before he died, he hadn't been feeling well. So he stayed home from church, and he slept a lot that day. And I do remember that our other kids came over. We had dinner. We played games as a family. And then we had a conversation with Ryan before going to bed, because we were concerned about, missing practices and, kind of questioning, are you staying up on your schoolwork? This is important. And, it was a parenting conversation, no anger exchanged, but looking back, I feel like maybe there was, from his perspective too, and knowing that he was experiencing depression at the time, I think he probably felt bad about the conversation. I do think he felt like we were calling him out, and that wasn't our intent. The intent was, hey, we're here to support, but we see some things we're concerned about. Yeah. That's a hard memory to look back on in many ways, because I wish I had done it differently. There was a point in that conversation where he said something to the effect of, it doesn't matter anyway. And I didn't really pick up on it. And I wish I had picked up on that statement. So I know that we ended the conversation. I do remember telling him, hey, this is a blip. We're going to get through this. I mean, I could tell he felt down about it. Mm-hmm. And, I just remember saying, we're going to get through this. And, I do remember saying, you matter to me, this does matter, but if I had put all the pieces together, that might've gone a little bit differently.
And we can do kind of like a retro analysis after of just for people that might be in a similar situation to say, this is what I wish I would have done. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the shoulda, woulda, couldas, right? That's not, but from like an educational standpoint, we might be able to do that at the end of the podcast and come back to that exact moment to say, now with some of the education you have, some of the knowledge you have, what are some of the things maybe you could have done differently? Yeah. Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast. Anyways, he says, it just doesn't really matter, right? And essentially the night ends from there.
Right. So he stayed up. I went to bed. My husband went to bed. It was fairly late, but not super late. I'm an early riser, so, I'm going to go to bed sooner. And again, he had slept most of the day, so I wasn't too concerned about him being up. And, so that was the end of that evening, end of my, interaction, if you will, with him. Yeah. So I got up the next morning very, very early. It was probably about 4:30 in the morning. And, as I came down the stairs, I knew immediately that there was something wrong. Like I felt it. And when I got to the kitchen, things were out of place a little bit, not as I had left them, after cleaning up after dinner. And it was like, oh, something's wrong here. And I didn't know what it was. And I could not have imagined what it really was. But I thought, okay, let's go check, see. And so, I checked to see if he'd fallen asleep on the couch. I went up to his room and I couldn't find him. And it was, started to be worried and think, where could he be? What's happened? So I woke Dana up, and Dana asked, is the car outside? And I hadn't checked. I hadn't been outside. I didn't go to look. And Dana did go outside, and that was where we found him. And without being too specific there, Dana began giving CPR, and I went and got my phone and called 911. And when I think back about it, like that was it felt like it took forever. Just like this, the clock stopped for me for whatever that period of time was. I don't even know how much time went by, but it felt like it just took forever for anyone to come. And so I do remember being on the phone, and I remember saying, please hurry. And the operator saying, you need to count while he's giving compressions, count, and, keep me busy and not let me think about and spiral. Right. Cause I was spiraling at that point. So when the paramedics did come, I went outside and I waved them in, thinking, okay, if I'm at least there, I can, hurry things along, I guess was what I thought. What I remember about that is it was very, very quiet. Like that was very disconcerting how quiet they were. There wasn't this
like urgency.
Yeah. And so, again, you can look back and say, well, they knew that he was gone. And I think Dana asked the question. I think he might have said, is he still alive? And they said, well, he's not breathing on his own. And so, yeah, that part was really excruciating.
From a relatability standpoint, I don't know if in their training, they're like told not to like talk to people or whatever. Cause even in ours, I was like, what's going on? Like what, like, and I started asking questions and like, they kind of just like looked at me and like kept doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, like, they wouldn't really answer any of my questions of what was going on, you know?
Yeah. So and in that moment, like, I can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
Right. I can't make sense of anything in this moment. What does this mean? What's happening? It's so devastating. It was just so devastating. So the paramedics took Ryan, I'm assuming it was an ambulance. I don't even know, to be honest. They took him and I remember someone saying, is there someone that can drive you? Can you meet us at the hospital and can somebody else drive? We don't think you should get behind a wheel right now. And our other son was upstairs. He was still asleep. So I went upstairs and I knelt by his bed and told him, hey, Ryan has tried to take his life and I don't know if he's still alive or not. And I remember, and Alex is really, really quiet. He is not a person of very many words. Like we count in syllables for the week, probably. I got 5 syllables this week. He was very, very quiet. But I remember him, and I remember the look on his face of shock. Like, what? What's going on? Him having that same sense of, what is even happening in this moment. But he did. I remember he put his arm around me and patted my back, and he's like, oh, okay, I'll get up, I'll get dressed, I'll drive you down. So he did, and we went to the hospital. And when we got there, that felt like it went fast. Like it feels like we walked into the door, they put us in a room, like a waiting room, but it was small, and okay, this can't be good. This can't be good. And so very quickly, I think there was at least 2 people, doctor and somebody else, that just came in very quickly, just said, we did what we could, but he's dead. And it was just like a Band-Aid, just really, really fast. And it's probably merciful, right? Because there was no confusion in my mind about his status, but it was, it just felt like super final and super just fast. And, in my mind, I'm just thinking, what can we do? What can we do? And it's like, there is nothing to do. There isn't, they've done what they could do. So after that, they had prepared a room where Ryan was, and we went in, and it was just so surreal to, here's this child of yours that is just no longer there, right? And there was that sense of him not being here, that this is just his body.
It's weird.
It's weird
because you're like, you're here, but it's not. Like it's
so not. Yeah,
it's you, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that sense was immediate that he was no longer there. So, those are the hardest moments, and really hard to go back there in many ways. I feel like we weren't there very long, and there were a couple of leaders from our church that came. And I remember thinking, how'd they get there so fast? Like that seemed really, really quick to me. Like all this, everything had been such slow motion, and then boom, and we found out later that the shift commander, I think it's called, anyway, police officer who was listening to calls and was on a different call at the time, but heard our address and recognized the address. And he actually had to look it up. He wasn't sure, but he I've heard that before, so I'm going to check and see. And so again, he was out on a different call, but he called a couple of leaders and said, it's go time. There's something happening with the Edwards family and you've got to get there for them. And they were there. And these are two men that we had worked with. So they were friends, as well as leaders, neighbors that we had known for, at that time, more than a decade, probably closer to 2. But so it was a great comfort. It was a great comfort to have them there. And I remember, the one gave me some really, really good advice, really hard advice, but it was, people are going to want to love you, and that's going to be hard for you to accept, but you need to let people love you. Let them serve you, let them in, and that's okay. And I was so glad that he said that, because I really did need to hear that, because I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me, right? I just wanted, I didn't want that. And yet, being able to let people in was very, very healing. So it was really important for me to hear those messages. And then they helped us with making some phone calls. And that was rough. That was really, really hard. And I don't think that I made very many. The wife of our pastor was there, and she called a couple of our best friends who came, and that was a huge comfort, right? There are people in your life that you trust enough, or that, whatever that connection is, they can see you with, no makeup on, and it's okay for them to see you in that really, really awful moment. And we had I had 2 friends, specifically Vicky and Audra, who were just really there for us and really took care of us. And Audra's son was one of Ryan's very, very best friends, and he came too. That was also hard, because, he is also 17, and to send him into that room to see Ryan, and understanding what that meant. And there was a part of me that felt like, responsible for this. This is going to be a difficult memory for him for the rest of his life. And I was grateful for his presence, grateful because he was very loving. It still is an incredibly loving young man. But there was that a little bit of responsibility, right? Feeling like I've contributed to trauma in his life in some way, but he was just really sweet about it. And I think it was good for him in some ways to be able to wrap his mind around Ryan being gone. So that was, those are hard memories to look back on. But I also remember it seemed really quick. Like I said, that seemed to be a time where things happened really quickly. I remember someone coming in to ask about organ donation, and they were very sweet about it, and recognizing that this was a hard moment for us and how tender we were, but also, that time was of the essence to some degree. And I'm really glad that we did that. That was something Ryan would have wanted. I know that he checked that box on his driver's license. And that would be true to his nature to give back in some way. Later we got a letter from, and I don't know the name of the organization, but the organization that does the
organ donation.
It might be, yes, but we got, information back about how they used, they couldn't use all of the actual organs, but they were able to use tissue, and his eyes were like, and I have a daughter who is an optometrist, and she's like, there's so many pieces of the eyes. There's a lot that can be done. So his retinas were donated, and that was really beautiful. Was maybe one of the first pieces of feeling like there was a way to have some good come out of tragedy, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't ever wish that on anyone, but I'm glad that in some way somebody else's life was enhanced, right? He did give a gift to other families, and that's lovely to think about. Hard for me, but lovely to know that there's something in there that could be good. And then I don't even know how long we were at the hospital, but by the time we got home, people began to gather. People came. I know when we drove up, there were flowers already on the doorstep. And I thought that was like really beautiful that someone would, first thing in the morning get that kind of news, but want to do something to show love to us. Mm-hmm. And that was really sweet. I will never forget. That's a Polaroid in my mind. Was where did those come from? And it was neighbors, it was friends of ours. And then people came, and there was food covering the counter, and they were just there to love us.
Hey, Lost Child Podcast family, if you love what we're doing here and want to support us, we started a Patreon account. It's a platform where you can sign up for a monthly subscription to help support our podcast. In the video description, you can find a link to our Patreon account. For as little as $10 a month, you can help support the Lost Child Podcast to help share these stories with the world. So please help support the podcast and help support us by visiting the link in that video description. We thank you. Now, back to the podcast.
And so that was hard, really, really hard. I'm not a hugger in general, but there was a lot of hugging that day. And I had to, reflect back on those words. Let people love you. Let them love you.
Did you ever have to take some time for yourself to maybe not be around all those people that were there? Or did you make it so that you were available to all the people that were there?
We were available for most of the part. There was our daughter, Sarah, was actually serving a mission in Mexico, serving a mission for our church. And so she called, and I do remember going upstairs with just our immediate family.
Yeah.
By then, our daughter and son-in-law had come. Actually, they had come to the hospital, but they were at our home. We did go upstairs and had a little prayer together. We talked to Sarah over the phone. And I remember very much Dana, it tapped into some wisdom that I'm not even sure where it came from. And not that Dana's not a wise person. He's often a wise guy. But I remember he said a couple things in that moment that set the course for us. Not just that day, but set the course for our lives. He said, I remember he was very emphatic. We will not be ashamed of Ryan, and we won't be ashamed of how he died. We'll be honest and tell people. And if there's a way for us to make good comfort from this, then we're going to find a way to make something good happen. And that was very much what we've tried to do throughout our grief journey. Try to be a light to other people if we could, try to give information if we could, try to offer support and love wherever we could. So I guess that was kind of a moment of withdrawal, but then we, came back into it. And that was just really beautiful that people would, they had to drop everything. This was a Monday morning, people had to get to their jobs, and that, you know how that is, how Mondays are. That
busy.
Everything starts and everybody's, plugging away. So many people dropped what they were doing and came to offer some support, some love. And I really appreciate that they did that. I don't know that I'm that person, even in the aftermath. I try really hard to step up where I can, but I don't know that I'm not necessarily on the front line of it. I have learned that not to be silent. That for me, that hurts so much more than even the uncomfortable or dumb things that can be said in the moment. I know that someone's trying, right? But silence, there's just too much, my brain starts to work on that. And that becomes painful for me. So that's one thing I've learned about grieving, is the importance of reaching out with love and, expressing love. If nothing else, express love, right? So that was that morning. That evening, there was an interesting thing that happened. The band got together and they had like a candlelight, because you couldn't have candles on campus, but they would have had cell phones or tea lights or whatever. But they had this event. They should have been at a competition and they ended up withdrawing because of Brian's death. But they still got together, and they would normally have had a practice on that night, but they opened it up to the community and to the other kids at the school. And we didn't go at the beginning, but we came later. And what we saw was the kids holding hands, and they call it a cinnamon roll, but it's a spiral that they would make. And it was just this huge spiral. And you could see them like, wow, how many people is that? And we walked out onto the football field, and the kids greeted us with open arms and love. And there was, we had been volunteers in band at school and, all the sports. I'd been a substitute teacher. So these were kids I knew. We were immediately concerned for them, right? How do we, could we set an example of resilience in some way, or just even offering our appreciation for how they had, showed love to us and how they were honoring Ryan so immediately. But I didn't speak, but Dana did, and just said, hey, it's okay to ask for help, and thank you for being, friends to Ryan and for loving Ryan, and essentially we're going to get through it, but we have to get through it together. So that's a very sweet, very, very poignant moment in time for me.
So then the next day, everyone was probably out of your house, just you, Dana, and Alex, I'm assuming, at the house. And then did people come over the next day too and be with you? Not
as much, although people did come. There were so many acts of service. There were so many people who just did kind things, just really reached out to us. I don't remember a lot about that week, that the fogginess really set in. So my memories of that whole week are very, very, they're patchy. So I remember like little moments. I remember just being in just immense pain. It was just so overwhelmingly sad. And I couldn't make sense of anything. And it was so hard to care about things. And they were like important things, right? You have to put together a funeral, and it was really hard for me to care about that. And I did care, but it was just, there was just so much sadness at that particular time. But I do remember people, I don't remember it being a crowd like that first day, but I remember people reaching out and text messages and phone calls. And I didn't take a lot of phone calls. I just couldn't do that. But some really lovely messages near and far. People just reaching out to us, which was really beautiful and sweet.
Is there anything that was super helpful that people said to you? Because there's not a whole lot that people can say.
No.
But is there anything that you remember that particularly helped you or made you feel loved?
Yeah, I think I don't remember a lot of the words. What I remember is the feelings.
Yeah.
And, in a lot of ways, it was the showing up that mattered. It was being present. I appreciated people that just said, "We love you. We love Ryan." Even in that moment, I appreciated people that would say his name. Because that can get to be hard for some. And some people think that might create more pain, especially moving forward in time. People worry, oh, if I bring Ryan up, is that going to make you sad? And it might, but it's just a sad circumstance. But for him to be remembered is always very sweet and very much appreciated from me. I know Dana feels that way too. I don't remember specific things that were said that were, most of the helpful things were just expressions of love and encouragement, and just a willingness to be with us, just to be there. I know there was a time or two when people said things that were awkward or hurtful, but I knew better than to take that on. All I could do was look at the attempt, right? What a person means when they say something like, "Oh, it's God's plan." That hurts my feelings a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with it. I don't think God planned for my child to take his life. I think God's plan steps in after that to make things better. Like that's the path forward of, redemption and healing and those things. But I learned pretty quickly to set aside the words themselves and just hold on to that feeling, right? That letting people love me. I'm going to hear the love and I'm going to let go of words that aren't effective or not helpful. And in years since, I've had to do that a whole lot more. Sometimes people that I meet, how would they know what I've experienced? And so we say a lot of things. There are a lot of sayings or, just phrases that come up and no one would know your experience. So, one says, "Oh, I'm not going to kill myself over this," or "I'm not going to," that's, I have a little twinge at certain words, but I also,
a little different.
Absolutely. It hits absolutely different when you've, lived that experience. But I also know they don't intend to harm me or hurt my feelings. And so I just have to choose not to take that on. The best way for me to describe it is I have enough pain. I have enough pain to last my lifetime. I don't need to hold on to, someone's miscommunication, because that's usually what it is. It's not intentional. It's not, if they knew they wouldn't say it. And, but I'm just not going to hold on to it. I can't afford that.
And sometimes in those moments, it's not needed to say, "I'm going to correct you on this." You know what I mean? Like that's not helpful from your end either. Right. So you kind of just let it be.
But that's also, there's pain in that, right? Again, silence. For me, silence is always more painful than just being straightforward. So when I meet people and when they ask about my children, I have 4 children, and I usually do say my youngest child, Ryan, died by suicide. I usually go ahead and say that. It sets them up for knowing who I am, and then if they choose to be careful or if they want to talk about it, I'm okay with talking about it. But it just allows them to know who I am and what I've experienced in life.
Yeah.
So I tend to be pretty direct. It fits for me.
So the weeks and months afterwards, how were you able to cope? What things did you do?
Yeah, it was really hard. Initially, we pared back on everything, but Dana and I would go for walks, and often, we would talk about things that we were grateful for. That was leaning into gratitude was very, very helpful for us. It would be easy to fall into the blame game, and we also knew that was not going to be constructive or helpful. So, those were the things I began to do to re-engage. I was in an exercise group. I have a hiking group that I've been part of for, actually now it's a couple of decades. And these are women that I love and enjoy. We all love to get outdoors and hike. So going back to those routines, getting back into the routine of exercising was really, really helpful.
How soon after did you get back into that routine?
We went for some walks, like very, very gentle walks the first week. I think it was maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks when I went back to my exercise class.
And how were those first times back?
Everything was hard. Everything was hard the first time that I did it, because I felt like a new person. Loss had just changed me in some way. And also the world kept moving, and I wasn't necessarily moving with it at that time. And there was a certain sense of how can things keep going? My child is dead. Yeah. There was like trying to wrap my head around that just life moves forward. It just does. And at that point, I wasn't ready for it to. So the first times were always hard. The exercise group that I was in, they were wonderful. They all embraced me. They were also the kind of women who would go ahead and go there with me. Right? We're not going to be silent. We're not going to pretend nothing happened. We're going to, go ahead and take it on. And so that helped a lot. Physical movement is really helpful for me. That's one of my coping strategies in general. Yeah. Getting outdoors is very soothing. Dana and I took a trip maybe 2 weeks after Ryan died to the Grand Canyon, because we both just loved the Grand Canyon so much. We also knew that was not the time for us to do a big hike, a rim to rim, which we both have done multiple of those. So we just, went and took in the beauty and the grandeur of that place, and, sat with our memories a little bit. We tried very hard, and I think it was a decision on our part to turn toward each other. Right? To seek strength within our marriage and to be a support to each other. Because there are concerns about what can happen to a family following a loss. And we didn't want to be a statistic. We didn't want to lose the family that we had left. And so we made a decision to turn toward each other, to try to comfort each other. And nobody knows the loss of this child like the other parent, right? If anybody gets what it is to miss Ryan, it's Dana. Dana knows what it is to miss Ryan and who Ryan is and what he was in our family. So,
did you seek any other coping strategies, like any therapy stuff, or you prescribed any medication or anything in that general vicinity of stuff to try to help you get through the grief?
We took a couple months to do that. Yeah. But we did go to counseling, and we actually went together, to counseling. And, one of the ironies, it's better now. Things are changing. At the time, we have 4 kids. 3 of them had been in counseling at some point in their teens, and none of it was ever covered by insurance, but bereavement was. And that was, like, I was grateful for it, but it was a bit of a slap in the face in some ways too. Like, oh, now that the worst that can happen has happened, now this is covered. But had a wonderful counselor. She was really, really good. We I think we did some smart things on our own. Yeah. And I don't know if they were intuitive or we had good people around us also. We were very careful not to stay silent. We reached out. We stayed within our community. One of the things that we did, and it's not therapy wise, but was very good for us and helpful for us, is we continued to go to the football games. We watched the band have their season, and they ended up being state champions that year.
Wow.
We were so glad that we were there because, again, this is something good was coming out of a tragedy. And so instead of that being the year that, one of their band members died, it became the year that they won a championship. And I think part of that was because they pulled together as a unit and they relied on each other so much. And I think that showed in their performance as well. But that was good for us. That was very cathartic to watch them grow and succeed in that way. Again, counseling was really helpful. Neither one of us sought medication. We were certainly grieving, but doing okay.
Yeah.
And managing and getting back to some of those normal things of, work and working out and all the things that were kind of normal, so to speak.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think a lot of it for me is being willing to be open, being willing to tell our story. I spoke at a school board meeting at one point, and part of it was because I knew that when you have a loss, or I think I learned along the way, when you have a loss in a community, the risk goes up for everyone that's left behind. And again, I'd been involved in so many years, in so many ways for so many years. It was really important to me I don't think that I contributed, but this circumstance that I was a part of, right? The loss of my child, his death by suicide, contributed to the risk for the other young people in the community. And it was important to me to find ways to mitigate that risk. So, when I had opportunities to speak up, I did. And that was good for me. Hard and draining in some ways, but good. And if I could share a message, then that was important to me, right? If I could let people know it's okay to get help. It's okay if you're struggling, right? You don't need to feel ashamed if you have anxiety or depression, right? That it's okay to reach out. So did some of that.
And is that the overall, the overarching message? Yeah. Sorry, the overarching message that you try to do when you actually go talk is about it's okay to get help. Do you give resources of where to give help? Do you currently have resources that could help people? What are some of those things?
So some of my favorites are, obviously the 988 number, which is a crisis line. You can call that at any time. And there are trained individuals that can help a person work through a crisis situation. They can also help connect you to other services that are most appropriate to your situation. So that's a great addition that came out. This was after Ryan died, that the 988 number was established. Some other organizations that I think are really helpful is Teen Lifeline. And they have a great website, teenlifeline.org.
Okay.
They also have a hotline. What I love about them is they actually train teens to talk to other teens.
Oh, wow.
So,
interesting.
So for a kid, that can feel less intimidating to know that they're talking to somebody, that they can relate to, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody their own age. And there are master's level counselors that support and supervise the kids that are in the call center. But it's a great opportunity if someone is, again, it's another hotline. If someone's struggling, you can call and talk to someone. They also have text lines. They have a really good website with good information. There's even pages that are like, I'm struggling myself, and it will, share information that can be helpful. I'm worried about my child who's struggling, or they have a page for teachers and leaders. I'm worried about a kid that I know. So a lot of good information there. The other organization that has been really helpful for me is AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
Okay.
And they do all kinds of work. They do a lot of prevention work, but they also work with families who've experienced a loss.
Okay.
And so that was a really good resource for me afterward, just to feel like I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only person that had experienced a suicide loss. That's a really helpful organization. They do events called Walk Out of Darkness. And it's a fundraiser, but it's also an opportunity for people to come together who have experienced a loss by suicide to honor their loved one. They always have great activities for adults and kids. Like I remember one year they created a tree, and you could bring a picture and put your loved one's picture on it, on the tree. This little art activities. They did like a virtual quilt, and we actually I remember my daughter was with me for one event, and we created, drew a little quilt square, and they create a virtual quilt that you can go back and look at, and that's kind of neat. But it, different rituals, I guess, if you will, activities that allow you to remember, allow you to have that moment. So that's an organization that I think does really great work.
So there's lots of different resources.
Oh, lots of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we did, and we all did it separately. I'm not quite sure how that happened. I think my daughter found it first, but mental health first aid it's like a first aid class for people that are experiencing a mental health crisis. Oh. And they have two different designations. They have mental health first aid for youth, meaning a person who is working with a youth or dealing with a teen or a child who's having a mental health problem or crisis. And what do you do? What do you say? And then there's another one for adults. My daughter actually got trained in it and became a trainer in her work.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a really good one because it just made it helped me feel more confident. But one of the things that happened because we were open in our community, we were willing to talk about Ryan, we were willing to talk about suicide and mental health. We became safe. And so people would call and say, my kid is struggling and I don't know what to do. Can you tell me where to turn next? And it became important to me to make sure I could answer that question in a way with not just empathy, but also give them good information and good, resources and something that would actually help them and not, I didn't want to say it wrong, if you will. So getting a little bit of help made me feel more confident in those conversations. So that was another really helpful thing to do.
Because you are so open and straightforward and willing to talk about all this, I have kind of a question that I would think is a little bit sensitive that I want to ask. And it's because I've had this sentiment and brought up to me, I've heard it from other people of in a case of a suicide, especially even a teen suicide, there's this risk or idea of we don't want to glorify that suicide for then to perpetuate more suicides happening from that glorification of that thing that happened. In your mind, as a parent who had Ryan commit suicide, how do you navigate that specific thing?
Right. So yeah, there's this phenomenon called contagion, right? And I talked about earlier about how the when you have a suicide in a community, there's a greater risk within that community. Yeah. So Ryan was a senior in high school. Every year of his high school career, someone had died by suicide or another violent act. And so, in that particular moment, that's a lot of risk, right? That among those kids, that's a lot of risk. So absolutely, we don't want to glorify the act. So we're really careful not to tell details of exactly what happened or, how he died. I try to make sure when I do talk about it that it's within the context of mental health and resources, right? So try to pair that message with the, if I can in some ways, normalizing, reaching out for help, normalizing talking about mental health. Statistically, it's like 1 in 4, individuals will have, a clinical depression or anxiety, right? So that's a lot of people. If you're, if you think about the people that and if one out of 4 of them is experiencing or has experienced a mental health disorder, there's a lot of us that have that.
Yeah.
So making it okay to talk about mental health is really important to me. I'm careful what details I share, and also want to be sure that that's the message, that there really are ways to make a difference, that no one has to suffer on their own. And so if someone is experiencing depression or anxiety, or they love someone that's experiencing depression or anxiety or any other mental health disorder, it's okay. It's okay to get help. It's okay to do whatever it takes to make the situation better. And it will get better. It will get better. So instilling hope, I think, is part of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a funny place to be. I do feel like I have a very sad story. I do think my story is sad, but also I have hope in life. I hope that I can instill that in other people. I hope that comes across as well, right? The sense of hope.
And I think I like to look at it too as like, if you broke your arm or you have a sinus infection, are you going to go to the doctor and get it fixed? Or are you just going to stay at home? If you have something physically wrong with you, you should get help. If you have something mentally wrong with you, you should also get help. It's the same thing to me.
Right. And it is available. It's, in fairness, it's not cheap. It's not easy. It's not quick. And so I think it's fair to be honest about, particularly mental health issues, because they are deep rooted. Sometimes we struggle and we don't know why we struggle, right? We just know that we do, and that can be difficult. That it can be difficult to find the right fit, right? Sometimes, we might go to a counselor and that's just not the right fit for us, whether it's modality or personality or whatever. And I would say it's okay to keep trying, right? To be persistent, that if one situation doesn't work out with you, keep trying, keep trying until you find a fit that does work. There are so many wonderful practitioners. There's all kinds of different modalities to seek out. So don't give up.
I like
keep trying. Yeah.
I would want to revisit one thing. Again, I don't want to go down the shoulda, woulda, coulda rabbit hole, right? But for educational reasons, which we talked about, that conversation that you had with Ryan that Sunday night, where he said, it just doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And you said, now hindsight, looking back, there are some things that you wish you would have potentially seen as red flags, or maybe you would have questioned differently or done some things differently. So from an educational standpoint, if somebody finds himself in a similar situation, what are some of those things that now you would potentially advise that person?
I would be much more clear in asking, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you having thoughts of suicide? You don't increase risk by asking those questions. And in some ways, that's a relief to the individual. It opens the conversation up so that they can say, yeah, I am struggling. And then it becomes easier to problem solve and to get help. But I would absolutely, looking back on that phrase of it doesn't matter, I would ask that, why do you think it doesn't matter? And are you contemplating suicide?
Yeah.
And that offered for help. I certainly wouldn't have gone to bed I rested on that. And I thought we were working through, but
going back to that exact time frame, because there might be some parents that are in that same place. Would you say at that point you were scared to say to Ryan, are you thinking of hurting yourself?
Yes.
Are you thinking of committing suicide? Or anything along those lines? Were you scared to say to him?
Absolutely, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring that up. And I knew he had a history of suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
I knew he had thought about it and even attempt. And I was afraid to go there. And what I didn't understand was that does not increase the likelihood of someone acting. It actually reduces it. If I can, I know I'm repeating this, but openness is everything. Being able to talk openly about what a person is experiencing, right? So asking straightforwardly, are you thinking of harming yourself? Do you have thoughts of suicide? That doesn't increase risk. It typically decreases it because it allows for that openness to happen. When we're silent or quiet or we hold back, that can lead to shame. And shame is very, very detrimental, right? That's the fuel on particularly on suicide, right? If the communication, whether you intend to or not, and I think that's what I worry about, that maybe I unintentionally created some shame, and I regret that. The antidote for shame is openness.
Okay.
Right? The antidote is to share, to be vulnerable, to be in it together. So yeah, if I could go back, I would absolutely ask very specifically. And it's tricky because now I know what the resources are. I didn't know what the resources were at the time. I probably would have gone back to what I had already done before. It would have been a trip to the doctor, a trip to a counselor. But I know those things now, right? So, I can move forward with the knowledge that I do have, and I can try to share that with others so that it's not so hard to find. Part of it for me, I think, especially with mental health, it feels like you're in a maze and you don't know what the correct turn is, right? And it doesn't feel like in society that we make it easy to access services. And so, that again, the trick is to keep trying, right? If this is a dead end, then let's go the other direction. Let's try something else, right? To stay in that, to stay in the struggle, because it is a struggle with mental health. It is a struggle. And many of us that have those conditions, we struggle for, it's a long-term condition, and that's okay. You're not alone in that. It's okay if that's what you experience, but there are ways to get relief. And some of that is learning about yourself, figuring out what works for me, what things help me to feel better. So, for me, that's, getting outside, it's exercise, it's moving my body. That tends to really help with my, how my mindset is, right? That I feel empowered. That's a big one for me. So finding out what gives you that, then okay, then I need to do more of that. Right?
Yeah.
So it's been, I think, 9 years.
Yeah,
it'll be on 10 years or
10 years in September. Yeah,
okay.
So a long time, it feels like. And yesterday in other ways.
Yeah.
And would you say that even in the last couple of years, you've still had some really, really hard days where the grief just kind of gets you?
Yeah. Yeah. There are probably more moments than days now, but the thing about losing a child is that it's there isn't that sense of completion, or both of my parents are gone now, and I can at least look back and say, oh, that was a life well lived. Right? That was, they came and they did all the things. They had a full life. And with a child, you lose all the potential and all the tomorrows are gone. There's so much that child should have been able to experience, and that we should have been able to do as a family with them. So, child loss is tender in that loss of potential. And the tragic nature of it doesn't ever change, right? It's still just as tragic that he's not here, as it was the day that he passed. I can't say, and everyone words it differently. For me, the pain is as great today as it was on the day that he died. But I think I've learned to carry it in different ways. And just like, if I do, if I lift weights, I'm going to build the muscles to be able to lift more and to lift heavier over time, right? Isn't that the strength is power over time? You can't lift weights once and think that that's it. Okay, my muscles are done. It's something that you do repeatedly over time. And I think grief is a lot like that. It's such a process. I think also that our mind protects us in certain ways. There are ideas and parts of the grief that I wasn't ready for that day or that week or the first few months. And there are pieces of it that have come to me later, and ways that I've grieved that might be new to me over time, but it comes when I'm ready for it. And I've learned to carry the grief, over the course of these years. I do not believe I will ever put that down. I think grief is just a burden, if you will, that I'll carry through life. But I find ways to shift it. I find ways to carry, and I try to work on it so that I can carry it, and not let it hold me back. Right? I am still here. So there's, one of the lessons of grief is the preciousness of life, right? So it's easier for me to say yes to things now. It's easier for me to try, because, I really fully feel and recognize that this is all I've got, right? I've got just this one life, and I want to fill this one life, not just with the grief, and I don't want to push my grief away either, because the flip side of it is love, right? If I didn't feel grief, I couldn't feel love. Well, I sure don't want to give that away. So I will accept that burden of grief, but I will also recognize the love that comes with that. And I absolutely love Brian. Miss very much the opportunity to say it to him, but I absolutely feel it with my whole heart. I love, my other children and grandchildren as well, and my husband. And hopefully this experience makes it easier for me to say that out loud, and easier to say it to them. I don't think I'm perfect at it, but hopefully that's one of the lessons that I can take and maybe live a better life because of what I've experienced. And that comes back to that idea also of making something good come out of it. If I can be a better person, if I can live more fully, then I feel like I'm progressing in some ways, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So trying to hold on to that is worth my effort, I believe.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us or the audience or parents or teens or anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah. I think what's really important to me to share with others is that idea of it's okay if you're not okay, that it's all right to ask for help, that it's okay if that's difficult. Also, stick with it and keep at it. To parents, all any of us can do is the best we can do. And none of us will be perfect at it, but we keep trying, right? We do what we can when we can do it, and we do the best that we can. In terms of, mental health, there's still such a stigma about it. So it's difficult to share when we're struggling or that we've had struggles. But, if we can drop some of that stigma, and if we can be open and loving to others, I think that helps. I think it then that makes that okay also for people to reach out. And so if there are more of us that are safe, there are more people that feel comfortable talking about mental health, then that makes it a little bit easier for others to ask for the help that they need. So that's just really important to me. And know that there are lots of ways to get that help. So keep asking, keep searching, and things really will be okay in the end. Even for those of us that grieve, things get better, right? Life does get better. We can all continue to move forward. And even when that's difficult, there are ways forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So sorry that this all happened with Ryan and that you've had to experience this. We applaud you on all the things that you're doing to try to bring awareness and help out all the different communities that you're a part of. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast and sharing Ryan's story.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And the same to you. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that Sonny's not here in physical form. But your love sure is, and that's evident, right? And you'll always have your love for her and her love for you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, and remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.